Hey, hello. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us wherever you are. There's always an added element of excitement on a Friday. I'm feeling it. Are you feeling it? I'm feeling it. It's a Friday edition of the Classic Guitar Rock Update. And I'm sorry, I'm still fighting this cold. I don't know if it's COVID. I don't know what it is, but I've had it for about 2 weeks. But I will endeavor to persevere. So Ace Frehley back in the news. I'm a sucker for Ace Frehley. I talk about him a lot. I think here's the thing about Ace. I like Ace because he doesn't take himself too seriously, right? When I listen to Ace music, he's about fun, right? He doesn't overthink it. He's okay with lyrics that sound like they were written by a 12-year-old. That's who he is. And I appreciate that. And the reason I bring him up is they've launched a new video for the second single. 10,000 Volts comes out on February 23rd. And guys, I have to tell you, the two singles that I've heard so far, I'm I'm digging. I love the guitar sound. I think they're fun songs. 10,000 Volts was the first single, the title track that was released a month or so ago. And this new one is called Walking on the Moon. And the video is goofy. The guitar riff is righteous. I mean, it's a good guitar riff. It's great. So so far 2 hits with the singles that have been released. The video is stupid and funny. And you can tell Ace not taking himself too seriously. He's wearing a spacesuit. He's dancing on the surface of the moon or playing on the surface of the moon. Multiple beautiful Les Pauls appear in the video, and there's space aliens in it. What's not to like? Ace Frehley, the spaceman, rocking out on the surface of the moon with space aliens. It does not get better. So check that out today. 10,000 Volts, the album, as I mentioned, will come out on February 23rd. He worked with Steve Brown on this. Now, I mentioned Steve Brown before. Steve Brown was in Trixter. Trixter was a pretty good band. Their timing was terrible, right? They came out at the tail end of the hair metal phase, right as grunge was coming in. So they had a short-lived career. They opened for Def Leppard, and he's maintained a relationship with Def Leppard. In fact, he has filled in for both Phil Collen and Vivian Campbell at various times when one of them had to miss. You know, Vivian had his Hodgkin's disease stuff going on that made him miss some dates. Phil Collen, I think his wife had a baby, so he missed some dates. Well, Steve Brown can interchange and fill in. He knows the vocal parts. He knows the guitar parts. He kind of fits right in, which is kind of cool. But he also is a producer / songwriter and does a lot with Frontiers Records. Frontiers Records, Frontier Music, whatever it's called. We've talked about that label a lot. Steve Brown has, been a producer / co-writer with a lot of these bands. His own project, Tokyo Motor Fist, is a fun project. If you ever want to check out any of their stuff, it's good. Well, he teamed up with Ace to write some songs and help him produce this album. So I'm excited about it. I'm looking forward to it. And I got to be honest, I've enjoyed what I've heard from Ace over the last few years. I've enjoyed more than anything I've heard from Kiss. Just saying. Okay. So stand by for the release of the full album on the 23rd of February. George Clinton, the funk icon, Parliament Funkadelic, right? He appears on a podcast, not a podcast. It's a words plus music series that you can hear on Audible. His is called And Your Ass Will Follow. That's the name of his. But he's talking about his history. Obviously, George Clinton, he talks about how, quote, I deliberately brought the attention to funk because I'd already seen what I knew in the 50s to be black music, which was rock and roll, was black music at first. By the time it got to the 60s, I wouldn't be able to do it. You had to cross over to do it. It had become white music. It really wasn't. We knew that Jimi Hendrix was partaking, but he was one of the only ones. So his point was, and this is true, right? The the what began as black music became mainstream, right, in the late 50s and 60s. Um, but here's where it's interesting. He says, I actually learned from Eric Clapton more about my own music than I paid attention to when I was growing up, because that was old folks' music. He's talking about blues music at this point, right? Kids don't like their mother and father's music. They never did. But once you get old enough to appreciate it, then you realize, whoa, I better get back to my lessons. When I have to wait for somebody all the way over in England to tell me about Robert Johnson. Okay, now this will be a topic of one of our podcast episodes, because this is a key part of music history for people to understand. Blues music was what started rock and roll. Absolutely, he's exactly right. It was blues music. And I will throw in that blues was probably 80% of the rock and roll bloodline, but country music also, right? Rockabilly music. I mean, so there was a kind of a country music thread, and this kind of converged to become what came to be known as rock and roll music. And what is ironic, and he brings it up with Eric Clapton, the blues, what can I call it? Blues craze, blues explosion of the mid 80s. And really, Stevie Ray Vaughan was a big part of that. I mean, there'd always been an undercurrent of white blues artists. Johnny Winter, one of those. Lonnie Mack, right? So there were these white guys that had been inspired by the black music of the blues. And in the 80s, this resurgence in blues, well, you got to go back even further. It's the 60s, right? It's Clapton, it's the Rolling Stones, it's the British bands that were going back listening to the great American blues artists, okay? And a lot of these who by the 60s, these guys were already getting old. Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, John Lee Hooker. Okay, so the British artists were bringing these guys over to England because they were playing these blues songs. Well, Led Zeppelin built a career on stealing blues songs. I mean, literally. They literally, that's a whole nother topic. They would literally verbatim play Willie Dixon songs and say they wrote them. And they had to later go back and pay Willie Dixon. That's a whole nother story. What's my point? My point here is that George Clinton, it's interesting, the irony, right? He says, I had to hear some white dude in England talking about Robert Johnson for me to go back and listen to the roots of my music, he calls it, right? Blues music. Just a fascinating history to look into. And ironically, when this blues explosion happened again in the 80s with Stevie Ray Vaughan and a lot of these blues influenced artists, all white dudes, by the way, with a few exceptions, Robert Cray, Eric Gales. So there were some younger, the next generation of black guys playing the blues, but there weren't many. You go to a blues show and it's all old white guys that are fans of that blues music. It's just an interesting, ironic juxtaposition. And George Clinton acknowledges that, yeah, there was a guy in England that had made me go back and check out the roots, right? Fascinating. But the blues invented rock and roll. Rock and roll comes from the blues with the little, country music, hill music, bluegrass, whatever you want to call it, that kind of filtered in as well to become what we call rock and roll. Fascinating. And we'll do a whole podcast dedicated to the blues. Tragic stories about how these legendary blues artists were treated. Most of them died penniless. Yeah, that's a discussion that we have to have. Nikki Sixx, this is good news, has claimed a legal victory in his ongoing battle with an alleged stalker. Now, back in November, Nikki talked about two deranged female fans that were stalking him. And guys, I know we've given Nikki a hard time, we've given Motley Crue a hard time, but this is serious, right? This is real life stuff here. There is no place for being creepy, stalking people, stalking family members of celebrities. It's weird. I don't know what possesses people to do it. I see it on X, right? And I'm not, I have 55,000 followers. I don't have that many followers, but even an account my size, I see creepy stuff. It's weird. Or how about these people that will create a fake account claiming to be someone? I mean, someone was messaging me the other night claiming they were Reba McEntire. I'm like, how weird are you to do? First of all, no one's going to believe you. Second of all, that's just weird. But Nikki has been awarded legal fees from this deranged lady that's been targeting him and his family. And he says now they're just awaiting sentencing. He says, quote, people can't do whatever they want when it comes to my family. It's important to hold these people accountable. And again, this is one of two cases that he has going on. He said, let's see, he first brought the scary situations to light in November, noting that a deranged woman from Tennessee and another stalker from a different part of the country had both been harassing and threatening his family. Creepy. The FBI got involved with legal action taken against both women. So that is good news. That is good news. Bruce K chimes in and says, I know many black guys that love classic rock. Yeah, there are. And there's a common thread, right? It's all rooted in that blues, rhythm and blues. Yeah, it's great. Bruce K, thanks for checking in. And my friend Will Hines, who's not allowed to say anything because he has incriminating evidence, he's checking in too. Hi, Will. Good to see you. Happy Friday. Thank you for tuning in. Any of you can make comments right while we're here live. So feel free to do that at any time. Kind of along the same lines about our conversation about George Clinton earlier, Run DMC. You remember Run DMC? Daryl DMC McDaniels of Run DMC has confirmed to People magazine that he and his bandmates were initially resistant to the idea of being involved with Walk This Way. Remember back in 1986 when Run DMC had the hit, they redid Aerosmith's Walk This Way, and they teamed up with Steven Tyler, who came in and sang the vocals. I remember that. I was working in radio at the time, and that song just came from out of nowhere, and everyone loved it. I mean, it was awesome. It was a great song. But they were concerned. They're like, we're not a rock band. And these are their words. Black people were going to hate it. Well, guess what? It was a smash hit on rock radio, on urban stations. Everyone loved that song. Got to number 4 on the charts, and the video was hilarious. So it wound up being I think it was their most popular song. And guys, it cannot be understated how this really turned Aerosmith around. Okay, in the mid 80s, Aerosmith they were not doing well. They were kind of circling the drain. Okay. But it was their Permanent Vacation album that came out right after this in like 87 was their return to form. It was a great album for them. And I think a lot of it due to the attention they garnered from this cover they did with Run DMC. The Run DMC version charted higher than the original version of Walk This Way charted in 1975. McDaniel said that when he, Joseph Rev Run Simmons, and the late Jam Master Jay were first presented the idea, they didn't want to do it. Yo, that ain't hip hop, he recalled telling Rubin. We thought it was going to ruin our careers. Our thing was, ain't nobody going to like this. All the people that like hip hop is going to be mad at us. We had no idea that everybody from Red Alert to Grandmaster Flash would say, yo, that's the coolest thing, he said. We didn't know that the black people were going to love it, end quote. Yeah, it was a smash. It was a smash. Bruce K says, black people love AC/DC. Is that true? I don't know. I'll ask my black friends. Do you guys love AC/DC? I don't know. That's great. Could be. All right. Let's go to the email again. I've been getting great emails. I appreciate it. You can drop me an email, classicguitarrock@mail.com. And I love this one. It says, Jeremy, like you, I'm a big fan of classic rock and classic metal. I think we are around the same age. I graduated high school in 1984. Actually, I graduated in 85. I am curious to know what other types of music you listen to. While my favorite is classic rock, our generation experienced radio that was much different than radio today. We heard all kinds and types of music. What non-rock artists did you like? Thanks and keep rocking. This is from Rachel Everly. Rachel, thank you. That's a great question, and you bring up a few points, and I could talk an hour about this. Radio was different for us in the 70s when we started coming of age in the mid 70s, late 70s, listening to the radio. You would hear all kinds. I can remember listening to the radio at night. I was always, I'd be out playing or whatever, but at night I'd listen to the radio, and you might hear a Karen Carpenter song, and then a Foreigner song, and then a Michael Jackson or Jackson 5 song. I mean, you'd hear it all on a top 40 station. So yeah, it was a real melting pot, and there was a lot of great non-classic rock artists that we heard all the time. I can remember loving the Michael Jackson Off the Wall. That was probably 79, I think, when that came out. Love that. Rock With You, all of that. I listened to all of that. I love that. And even what was considered pop, there was great music there. Late 70s, Blondie, Pat Benatar. A lot of what was top 40 music was great music. Great, even considered classic rock. But what was her name? Anita Hill. You can ring my bell. I mean, we were hearing disco, Donna Summers, and it was just, we didn't worry about genres, right? We just listened to it and we liked the song or we didn't like it, and it didn't matter what the genre was. It was really more of a melting pot. It is interesting that a lot of the music, once you were in high school, you hit a point when you're young, you just listen to whatever you like. But then you get to a point in high school, at least I did, where then you're worried about, what will people think? What will people think if they know I like this song? And now, then when you get older again, you get to the point where you don't care anymore, right? Now you're comfortable enough with your masculinity to say, I really like Duran Duran, right? In high school, I would never have admitted that. But man, I like a lot, and I have Duran Duran records now. I would never have admitted to that in high school. Pre-Wars chiming in, he says, I lived through the radio, all music from 100 to number 1 on the charts, so you heard a bit of everything. And that's exactly what it was like. You know what's fun to do? Go back and listen to, and you can do it. iHeart has it. This is not a commercial for iHeart. iHeart has a channel of nothing but Casey Kasem's top 40. And it's fascinating to go back and listen to a Casey Kasem from like 1978. And you're like, holy cow. Because you will hear on Casey Kasem's countdown, you will hear everything. You will hear hard rock, you will hear funk, you will hear super mellow, easy listening. You will hear ABBA pre-war chiming in again, says, I'm not ashamed of my ABBA. I agree. Okay, so I've gone back and listened to ABBA. I mentioned my Duran Duran. It's funny this came up because just an hour before I started this, on my Twitter, I shared someone's post asking what was the first album you ever bought with your own money. Well, the first new album I ever bought with my own money was The Village People, right? I mean, we listened to it and we liked it and we didn't really care. Then you get into high school, at least for me, and then I was more concerned about I don't want anyone to know that I like Michael Jackson or Duran Duran. It's just funny the way that works. Michelle Jordan chiming in. Casey Kasem was pretty awesome. We'd listen to it at the beach. Great variety. Hi, Michelle. Thanks for chiming in. Yeah, I mean, it was totally our world, right? We didn't really care about genre, and I kind of missed that, to be honest. I kind of missed that. Even as I have started my empire, I didn't choose to be a classic rock media mogul. I didn't choose the classic rock media mogul life. It chose me, right? But even as I purport to talk about classic rock, sometimes I'll mention a band and people say, that's not classic rock. It is what it is, right? I love Blondie. I love Michael Jackson. I do. I mean, I love that. Regardless of genres. Now I'm just rambling, but this got me excited, Rachel, the email that you sent. So I think our generation, Gen X, radio's not as fun as it used to be, in my opinion. And I think a lot of it is because it's become overly formatted. Okay, and this happened really in the 80s was when they really started to format, narrow things down, and consultants, right? Radio stations hire these consultants and say, you need to play these 12 songs every 90 minutes. And then, there is a whole formula for it, which sadly kind of took out some of the fun. Yeah. So it is what it is, but I think we all can look back to that melting pot that was radio, and the psychology of music is such that music triggers memories, right? So we hear a song that we heard all the time as a kid, and it automatically floods our minds with memories. Paul McCartney's Somebody's Knocking on the Door. Remember that? That was probably like 76. I hear that song, and that was when I was really starting to pay attention to music, and that's another song that just triggers these memories in my mind. It's amazing. Michelle says, I miss variety. Streaming has limited me more than I knew. Social media replaced radio talks, in my opinion. Yeah. And social media there are great things about social media. There are great things about streaming. But you're right. It has changed. It is different than the 70s and 80s when we were all growing up and listening to music. I could talk about this for an hour. So Rachel, thank you so much for your email. Please, any of you, feel free to email me your questions, comments, whatever, classicguitarrock@mail.com. Have a great weekend, and we'll do it all again next week. Thank you so much. Live long and prosper. Bye-bye.